We tend to believe that we can lose that. This is the big illusion right there, to think that it can fluctuate. But it's not possible, truthfully. You can never lose being. It's not possible. Maybe you can feel it less. You know what you're tasting during meditation? Maybe you feel it less in your daily life, but it's not really that important, really. Because what you are, and it can never be lost. It is beingness that itself lives the illusion of being absorbed to something else than beingness. That is the essence of every experience, really, in daily life. Attention is caught onto conversations or objects or etc. And we don't feel ourselves in this pure I am. But it is this pure I amness that is living this experience. So there is a possibility to come back to it always when we realize that, when we become aware that, oh, I am a bit distracted, I am caught into this world. And as soon as we see that, this I amness, I am is back, in a way, is there. So we can see there is this sense of a perception, whatever the perception is, and there is what is experiencing this perception. Most human beings tend to project onto the world, but when we realize the wholeness there is in what is prior to this perception, then it's way easier, because we are programmed for joy. We are woven with joy. So this absolute joy, the one that is never going to move and fluctuate, is not turned towards those senses, but rather inside, inner direction, but it's only symbolic. But when you get that, it happens pretty much on its own. There's a sort of a feeling, in the background that knows that every time we stumble onto something, you'll feel that, oh, no, that's not the right direction, so I'll just come back here. Coming back to I am, prior, and what is prior to this I am, prior to any sort of manifestation. On my path, it was quite precious to come back to what was prior to any perception that was arising, in good moments as much as in bad moments. It was even stronger during good moments. So, I was tasting something quite nice. I was like, nice, but what is experiencing that? And this helped me anchor and this permanent happiness, rather than doing it with, difficult things, like trauma that we try to resolve. So we tend to go through spiritual paths to avoid or resolve, traumas, not happy moments. But it can also become a trap, and because we tend to get attached to resolving, and there's no condition in life that can prevent you from coming back to I am. It's absolutely impossible. I was going through a quite ascetic practices. And so I was meditating a lot, and I went to a party at some point, and there was techno music going on. And I was absolutely, enjoying the party. I was dancing, moving. And all of a sudden, this I am revealed itself. So I was moving hard, dancing hard, and all of a sudden, I was out of space and time. So you feel like everything is moving and crying and screaming, but the truth is that nothing is moving. So it's not awakening per se, but it's those glimpses before. So this I amness is always there. You just realize that it's always there. It's impossible to lose it. We do have a lot of ideas on this path, like there's a certain need for conditions, but what you are doesn't depend on any conditions. Beingness has no condition to be. There's no reason to be. There's no meaning or reason to this beingness. It's just always there. And to verify that into every sort of experiences, it's very good to anchor it. At first, when we discover that, we tend to practice meditation, for instance, in good conditions, like nature. But then, after a while, it's good to start practicing in any sorts of conditions. It's not even a practice per se. It's just a game. Take it as just a game. Can I taste I am when I'm cycling or when I'm running or stuck in a traffic jam or in the metro or whatever the situation? When the body is tired, can I still feel I am? Can I stay in I am while I watch the body falling asleep? Can I be in this I amness in a dreaming state? It is a little bit trickier, but you just have to play with it. And you'll really realize that you can't lose it. Whatever happens, you can't lose I am.
Donc ça, c'est je suis. C'est une marche indispensable puisque dans les
it is so this I amness is a true first step that is really important. Like Jesus said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But he's not talking as himself as a human being, but as this I amness. Life, formless, is I am. I amness. When you perceive life without adding any description to it, that's it. Whoever drinks my water will never be thirsty. When you're in this I amness, there's no need for anything else. You're filled, fulfilled, already. That's it. It is the way. Except for spontaneous awakening, but for most people, it is the path. Just to immerse yourself, still tranquil there. And once you're really wet with it, the shift happens after a while. When it's supposed to happen, it happens, and it's natural. Consciousness suddenly becomes aware of itself. And all the I want and I know are replaced by I am. All that is left is the core. You've peeled the onion, so all that is left is the essence. And it's not something that can be done with, some kind of human effort. There,
Ou plutôt l'intention est nécessaire jusqu'au
intention
moment où on comprend que l'intention
is necessary up to the point where you realize that intention is a movement and it's going to block you, because what you are is not movement, motion. Absolute consciousness is absolutely still, immutable. You can't move it. And yet, apparently, it appears as if, looks like there's a mouth that is speaking, and looks like we're here speaking and sharing, but it's only an appearance. The truth is, it really is not moving. There is an underlying silence, so to say, just to put words onto it, that is not moving. When you turn your head like this, you can see that many things are, changing in front of your eyes, but there's something that is not moving. Let's say behind the eyes, that is really not moving, not fluctuating, nothing. Beingness, being, doesn't move. So presence is good. But we wanted to push it a little further today. So it is essential, presence is essential to be stable, to be able to rest yourself onto, or to be able to come back home is the way, yes. In my experience, the shift happened when the quest drops. Lots of people testify about that, the moment you drop or you let go of the... But it's not happening, it wasn't intentional. I just realized that I had no power over the situation. I was kind of capitulated. And it goes even further than that. So there was this realization, I have no power over this. So there's this. Surrendering, and there was also a letting go of all the tension towards this realization. And I realized that it's not even true that I don't have any power. It's just this I doesn't exist. Well, it doesn't have a substantial reality. It's just an illusion, and it doesn't have any power over anything. I like the metaphor of Santa. This character that is, supposed to exist.
C'est comme le Père Noël quand on était enfant. On nous a parlé de ce Père Noël, on nous a fait
we've heard about this Santa that, gives us presents at Christmas, and at some point in life we realize that it's a myth. Whoop. There's one of them that haven't heard about that before.
C'est terrible, on se rend compte de ça.
It is terrible. You might be able to find one in the astral world.
Ça fait le même effet quand on découvre l'irréalité du moi. C'est-à-dire qu'il existe en tant que personnage imaginaire, comme le Père Noël. C'est vrai qu'il
it is only a character that is part of an illusion.
Pour autant, le Père Noël ne disparaît pas de notre esprit. On continue à pouvoir en parler.
Same with Santa. We know it's not real, yet it still exists in our mind, right? We still talk about him, but we just know that it's not real, it's not true, and it's never going to change. Well, that's the same with awakening. This idea of an I, a central I, that would be something real as in on its own, with sub-parts.
C'est ça qui est découvert, c'est que le moi, on pourrait dire, c'est l'ensemble de ces parties. C'est un ensemble de parties, en fait. C'est un système. C'est pas une entité
me
centrale.
is not a central unity. It's just made of different parts.
C'est ça qui est
thoughts, beliefs. It's
et qui est à laquelle on
and this
s'identifie en
central
tant que
I
personne avec
is
un
the
nom,
same as
etc.,
Santa.
une histoire, une
It's
culture.
a central I that will rule all those
Et dans le
parts.
chemin
That is
spirituel,
like
je
Santa,
trouve que
an
c'est vraiment
illusion.
important de bien comprendre que ce n'est pas ce personnage qui s'éveille.
And it is important to
impossible
realize that it is
qu'elle-même
not the
ne pas
character
réaliser
that
qu'elle n'existe
awakens. Santa can't realize that it doesn't exist, right?
Il pourrait dire que le moi, c'est ce sens de séparation.
So the me is we could say that it's a sense of separation, and there's just a recognition that this separation never existed really. Yes, and this me that we've always thought to be has never been separated from the self. It is just consciousness putting clothes on itself, in a way, just believing I am this with this story. But in truth, it's always been this absolute I amness without any sorts of separation. You don't have to oppose some sort of, a little me that you have to fight, to realize that you are I amness.
Moi, pour moi, c'est vraiment un message important parce que moi, pendant
It is an important message to me. This quest, during 14 years, I've been fighting against this me. When this me disappears, I will be enlightened.
Ça fait un drôle d'effet. Quand ça arrive, ça fait un drôle d'effet.
It does feel weird when it happens.
Mais il n'y a personne qui agit.
Because we act in life, but there's no one who's acting. So, like you're driving your car and you see your hand on the wheels. No one is doing anything. So you're in the world with time and space, into which everyone believes, and you're permanently in the both of them. You live from a space that is spaceless and timeless, and living in a world where there is time and space. So it's very, very weird. I don't know how it happened for you, but at the beginning, to me, it was very destabilizing, unsettling. There's no more becoming, because it is only the ego that wants to, achieve something. Life doesn't want to achieve anything. Life just does. So it hasn't been destabilizing. It's been fun. Yeah, it is fun. It was such a relief. It's the end of a fight, an inner fight. And it was so funny to see all those interactions with people. It's like, wow, you can really believe in that. It's really well put. What a great mechanism here.
Je crois que quand il y a cette réalisation, il y a une période où vraiment il y a une profonde désidentification. Donc il n'y a plus du tout, on se reconnaît tellement plus du tout dans le personnage.
There is a whole part where you really don't recognize yourself as a little character. You just see the whole world as yourself. And then some of them call it the honeymoon of awakening. And then there's maybe some sort of integration where I can't really talk about that because it's quite new to me. The shift happened only 3 years ago, so it's quite recent.
Vers où ça peut mener, mais oui.
Est-ce que ce serait ça dans les traditions, les différents stades d'éveil?
Would it be what different traditions talk about when they talk about steps or stages in awakening? Yes and no. You could say that awakening is both alpha and omega. It's the beginning and the end. You can't be half awakened. Oh no, you can't. You can't half believe in Santa, right? Well, maybe when you're 5-year-old, maybe might exist, might not, but after a while, But maybe then, are there stages on energetic levels? Well, it is called anchoring in India. We are establishing There's then the first step is realize the self, and then establishing yourself
Je connais
as
quelques
and
sages qui
into
sont
the self.
toujours au niveau... mais après, il faut le vouloir aussi, c'est-à-dire vivre tout le temps au point de vue absolu.
I know some sages are
C'est-à-dire que quand tu viens leur poser des
constantly
questions sur ton
living
histoire
from
humaine, ils
this
vont pas
absolute
te
state of
Ils disent c'est une histoire que tu te racontes,
absolute.
c'est tout.
Ouais, voilà, pour eux, ça n'existe pas du tout.
To them, it doesn't exist at all.
Même Ramana Maharshi,
Even
il
Ramana
répondait
Maharshi
très souvent au niveau absolu, il descendait rarement en dessous. Et
used
quand
to
il posait
answer
une
from
question,
this
comment
absolute
résoudre la souffrance sur Terre,
level.
il disait, mais quelle souffrance, qui souffre?
And when he was asked how to
Qui souffre?
resolve the suffering on
Il y a
earth,
souffrance,
he
mais il y a
would
pas de
answer, but
souffreur.
who's
Il y a pas de
suffering?
souffrance.
Which
Au
suffering?
niveau absolu, il n'y a aucune souffrance. Il n'y a pas de bien, il n'y a pas de mal.
On
il
the
n'y a pas de
absolute
temps, il n'y a pas
level, there's no
d'espace, il y a-
suffering. There's no
il reste
time,
plus
there's no
grand-chose.
space, there's no bad or wrong. I'm still insisting just to make sure. So that those stages in awakening that we hear about in Buddhism, up to the, those pure lands,
Avant l'éveil, après l'éveil.
Non, ça n'a pas de sens ou de réalité.
there's no truth in that.
Différents stades, hein.
Ouais.
Des formulations pédagogiques.
D'accord.
Au sein
Might
de
be pedagogic way of
Enfin, je
presenting
reconnais
it.
certains stades dans mon expérience. J'entends des personnes parler de stade d'éveil et des
I
fois,
do
c'est
recognize
très pertinent,
sometimes
et puis des
people
fois,
testifying
moi, ça s'est
about.
passé avant, dans l'ordre qui est dit là. Tu vois, moi ça c'était avant, puis ça c'est venu après. Pas dans cet
I can
ordre-là.
see that sometimes
Il y a
it's
comme
not the
des
same
stades
order.
d'intégration.
It didn't happen in
Pas
the same
dans la
way
réalisation,
as some other
réalisation
people.
au sens prise de conscience. Ça c'est direct.
J'ai compris.
Et puis la façon dont ça va s'intégrer dans un organisme
So
unique,
the
ça va
shift
dépendre
is
beaucoup de
direct,
positionnement,
it's
il y a
here,
du parcours,
and then
plein de choses.
how
Là,
it's
on tombe dans
gonna
le relatif.
establishing and
Et dans quelque chose de
is gonna be
temporel,
different.
progressif.
we come back to
Et en
this
même temps,
temporal
là,
space.
ça a plus d'importance.
Oui,
Ouais.
le chemin de toute façon. Ce qu'il
There's
faut
no-
surtout
there's no
retenir,
more
c'est que l'éveil,
path,
c'est la fin
and
de la
it's-
souffrance, point barre en fait.
Awakening
Et le
is
reste,
just
c'est
the
dans
end
le
of suffering. That's the only thing you need to, keep in mind. The rest is really not that interesting.
Formaté pendant des années. Alors,
Ouais.
Ouais.
c'est
Well, I can
important
feel
pour moi
that
de
I've been
Ouais.
retraduire tout, quoi.
Oui.
formatted for
par quoi?
Le bouddhisme.
by Buddhism, Tibetan.
Il n'y a pas de niveau d'éveil, mais des niveaux dans l'illusion.
Ouais, ça, c'est très bien, ça.
Maybe we could say that there's no levels in awakening, enlightenment, but there are levels in the illusion. Yes, that's very true. That's absolutely it, actually.
Parce que bien évidemment, même
Because
cette intégration progressive,
obviously
c'est encore
this
du domaine- ça fait encore
progressive
partie du rêve.
integration is still part of the dream.
C'est clair.
Ouais.
Merci.
Il y a des êtres, on dit éveillés,
There are some beings, enlightened
pas d'une
beings.
expérience comme ça,
They don't
brutale,
talk about a brutal experience or shift, like saying this was 24th of August, 9:30 at night.
comme si ça s'était en fait intégré.
It feels like it was more something that was integrated so slowly and smoothly that this absolute understanding that we're not this little me,
Dissociation, et puis il peut y avoir une intégration
and this integration that is very progressive.
jusqu'à une séparation complète.
J'ai entendu parler de ça, mais
Yes, I've
moi,
heard
j'ai pas
about that.
du tout vécu comme ça.
I haven't
C'est ça qui est
lived it
étonnant,
this
parce que,
way.
Il y en a qui parlent de l'éveil comme étant quelque chose de frappant. on va dire.
Some talk about awakening as something really like a shock, quite unsettling
Pour
and
moi, ça a tellement été
destabilizing.
frappant que j'ai pas compris, en fait.
To me, it was
Je
so
cherchais pendant 17 ans,
shocking
dans
that I
ça,
really
j'ai rien
didn't understand it at first.
Et quand j'ai
I've been
commencé à
looking for
comprendre que
17
c'était
years.
ça, je savais depuis que j'ai 19 ans que je devrais partager parce que c'est comme ça, enfin, je le sentais. Et là, je me suis dit, mais comment je vais expliquer ça?
And when it happened,
Surtout
I've
à ce
always
moment-là
known
où
since I was
vraiment on dit,
19 that I would be sharing about this. And when it happened, I was wondering, but how can I talk about that?
Because
Because
à un moment donné, c'est complètement inexplicable, quoi. Tu peux
this
revenir un petit peu, quoi, pour
identification
pouvoir
is
dire,
so plain
ce qui se passe,
that
quoi.
is quite hard to
Et
talk
encore,
about it.
On peut même pas, on peut vraiment que pointer, quoi.
You can only really point
On le comprend
towards
pas.
it. You
J'étais en
can't.
voiture, boum, d'un coup, tout est devenu
You don't
clair.
really understand it. I was
Ça roulait. Ça roulait. Bah,
I was
je
driving.
perds jamais je suis.
C'est pas
parce que-
planté dans le décor. hein,
Non,
tout
je
va
suis
bien.
pas planté. Je suis pas
I
planté.
didn't,
C'est devenu
didn't have a
très-
car
tout est
crash
devenu
or
très clair. Bah, justement,
it's
il y a
just
pas
that
de moi. En fait, c'est
everything
comme si
become
tout a été
very
mis à
clear.
plat,
There's
tu vois.
no me. It's like a tabula rasa. It's like, you know. So there's the mind and there's the little character and all the thoughts and beliefs. But I really didn't get that this was enlightenment. I was just very conscious all the time. Even, you know, in the morning, just right before opening my eyelids, I was very present, very conscious. And I told my partner, you know, I really don't get what's happening to me. It's like I'm so conscious all the time without any effort. So there was a little bit more of unraveling. We are so fascinated by the little me. So consciousness kind of focus and, you know, but when the me disappears and dissolves, it unravels and
C'était pas tout le temps, mais ça m'arrivait comme ça d'un coup, boum. Genre, je regarde une petite cuillère, je suis en train de manger.
It's like, you know, I was eating with a spoon in my hand, and I see a reflection in it, and it was like, wow, as if it's the very first time that you see it, and you recognize yourself. I could see the spoon and see that I am the spoon. I don't have any effort to see that you and I are one. It is the same force that makes me see and make you see. I can't really explain it. It doesn't leave me anymore. That is an important point. Enlightenment is permanent. Because I've been caught several times, you know, that in the belief that I was awakened, but I had a good guide. So, you know, after an ecstatic state, you know, when it can be deceiving, you know, especially if it goes on for a week, or people have actually wrote to me telling me about, you know, 7 months experience of ecstatic state, and they feel like I've lost it, but it's just an energy state experience, and what we are is prior to that. I'm guessing that you can see that there's an identification that is happening again. It's like out of automatism, but yet this absolute is not lost. Yes, indeed. In India, we talk about those. We talk about glimpses. But generally, if it doesn't stabilizes, then means that some things haven't been seen already. Well, I'm not sure about that, because when it is seen by no one. It just recognizes itself. But then how could you lose it? You know, it sees itself. It recognizes itself, but there's no witness as a person being a witness. But then how could you come back to identification? I don't know. Well, you know what? Actually, consciousness everything is possible with consciousness. Tony Parsons talk about that because it talks about the fact that the body sometimes can't handle so many informations, so there's just glimpses. So afterwards there's recrystallization just to let the body handle the whole thing. There's also the fact that there's a habit. The mind is made of habits. And if we're not vigilant, we could think that we could believe that, oh, I've actually been drawn back to the character. But it is seen. It is discernment there. I went through a moment where I felt like and I could see that I was thinking, oh, I've lost it, and I've been. And when it was understood that it is witnessed, I could see that there was the idea that I've been drawn back to the character. Then it relaxed. I relaxed. Comes back to. It's quite hard to put words onto this. But
Et j'en connais,
for
hein,
someone who
qui après
have
semblent être
been through
repartis
this
dans leur
shift and
difficulté
and
égotique.
look like they have
Qu'elles s'inquiètent
gone
pas.
back to
C'est ce
their
que je partage dans mon deuxième livre, La Grande Paix du cœur. Où je dis,
egotic
mais revenez à ce
character.
qui perçoit, revenez à ce qui est conscient.
I keep
Parce
telling
que
them,
ça,
do
cette
not
vigilance, vous
worry,
allez voir, elle est toujours là. Elle est
just
toujours
come
là.
back to this consciousness, this presence that is
Le je suis, bien sûr.
Ouais.
Ouais.
that is always there, that you
D'où il y a
can't
des gens qui
lose
n'ont pas de
this
bascule, qui
I-amness,
vont
yes.
petit à petit glissent dans le je suis.
And that's, yet there are people testifying about how they just slip to this I-amness without realizing that. I don't know how it happens, but I do have people telling me I didn't have any moments, you know. It's just little by little, you know, the evidence was this obviousness was there.
Et ça, c'est une pratique ancestrale, la pratique de voir
It
s'il y
is
a
an
vraiment un moi.
ancestral practice
C'est Soham.
to look if there's a me. It's like, it's called Soham,
Quoi?
which means me,
Moi,
what?
quoi. Et si vous allez,
If you go,
jouer à ça, vous
if
allez
you
voir,
play
vous
with
allez voir,
that,
essayez
you'll
de-
see.
Je vous pose la question. Il est
I'm
où le
actually
moi?
asking you,
Qu'est-ce que moi?
where is me? What
Allez
is
voir.
me?
Montrez-le-moi, le moi.
Show me me.
Qui suis-je?
Who am
En
I?
fait, qui suis-je, c'est une
Not-
traduction qui est fausse. La vraie traduction,
Who
c'est
is
moi.
not a right
C'est moi.
translation.
Pourquoi?
The true
Pourquoi moi?
translation is
C'est ça,
what.
La vraie question.
Me,
qu'est-ce
what?
que moi vraiment?
What is,
C'est au moment donné
what
où tu te
is
rends
me?
compte qu'en fait, il n'y a jamais eu de moi.
When
C'est
you
une
realize that there's
construction,
never
comme je
been
disais
a
hier
me,
matin.
there's only a
C'est- on l'a
construct.
appris. Le moi est
We've
appris.
learned
C'est appris.
this me.
Moi, c'est pareil. Oui.
Ouais, le moi,
This
c'est pareil.
separate,
Parce que-
separate,
Oui, mais
separate
parce
me.
qu'en fait,
Yes,
il se
but-
révèle être le moi absolu. Ce moi séparé, c'est le même.
this separate me is actually the same as this absolute me. It's just that there's a belief in between, which is the belief of being separated.
Allez, je vais m'autoriser à ressentir moi. Ce bon moi là, ce bon moi, je identifié. Qu'est-ce que ça fait de le ressentir?
How does it feel to actually feel in the body?
Tu peux avoir
you know,
une surprise,
this
parce que c'est quelque chose
big
qu'on-
old
on
me,
s'arrête jamais
you
pour,
know? Have you ever
vérifier comment c'est-
ever
comment c'est
tried
vraiment-
that?
Est-ce que c'est vraiment tangible?
How is it really? What is it
Si vous
made of?
allez
Is it
vraiment
really
au centre,
tangible? If you really go
regardez
at the
s'il y a-
center, at the core of it,
S'il y a un moi au centre,
look if there's a me at the center, at the core.
On peut le ressentir.
We can sense
C'est
it.
ça que je t'invite à faire. Ressens-le.
Yeah, this is the invite. Taste it, sense it, feel it.
est-ce que ce moi est conditionnel à quelque chose?
And is this me conditioned to anything?
Déjà, est-ce que vous le sentez? Est-ce que vous sentez quelque chose que vous
First
pouvez
of all,
dire,
do
ah,
you
ça, c'est moi,
feel
c'est
it?
vraiment le pointer.
And say,
Parce
point
que
towards
c'est
it
comme
and
quelque
say,
chose
oh,
qu'on
that
cherche et qu'on
is
n'arrive
me.
pas.
Ouais,
Ah,
y
voilà,
a
c'est ça.
No,
C'est vide.
no, there's nothing. It's empty. It's just a concept.
Une observation.
Voilà.
It's
Et
just
c'est-
an
c'est bien de le comprendre
observation.
intellectuellement, mais c'est
Yes.
bien de vraiment le-
It is
ben,
nice to
vérifier
understand it
en-
intellectually, but it's even more interesting to taste it in direct experience.
Donc on peut toujours le chercher, en fait, notre attention, il y a un truc là, ah ben non, puis là, puis essaie d'attraper quelque chose, puis finalement...
The
il y a rien.
attention keeps on trying to grab something, but there's nothing to
Ce
grab.
moi se révèle finalement, là, quand je fais le-
This
je
me,
demande,
Ouais.
oui, il y a un sentiment moi, mais
Bah oui,
c'est juste
there is a
une
sense
étiquette
of,
qui est dessus.
ouais, qu'est-ce
of,
que
of
je-
me,
Ça rebascule dans la présence.
Dans le pur je suis.
but it's
Ah,
just a label because it's always shifting back to this presence.
Se révèle être en fait la conscience.
Exact.
And
Voilà.
this identified sense of me reveals itself to be pure consciousness. Yes.
Ce qui crée juste le,
What
la
creates
souffrance, en fait, de
suffering
l'humain, c'est la-
in human
c'est la
beings
croyance, le
is the
pouvoir de
belief,
croire qui est énorme,
the
énorme.
power
Avec le
of
pouvoir de
belief.
croire, un humain, il peut faire,
With this power of believing, you can do anything. You know, like I believe I can go to the moon,
Le pouvoir de croire est capable
and this power
de
in
réduire
belief
la conscience
is
infinie
capable of reducing
en- c'est ça qui est
infinite
complètement
consciousness
fou. En fait, ce qui est fou, c'est
into,
pas l'éveil.
which is
C'est fou, c'est
absolutely.
la conscience absolue et de se croire
What's
un
crazy
petit,
is not
un petit
awakening.
bonhomme sur une
The
petite
craziness
planète,
is really
dans
to
l'univers.
believe that you are something, a little human
Séparé,
being, you
ouais.
know, separated into a
Ça,
whole
c'est que
big
le pouvoir de
universe.
croire. C'est
And
la
that's
magie
only the
de la
power of
croyance.
believing, you know.
As you think, so you become. On dit
As
ça,
you
comme
think, so you
quand
become.
Tu penses, tu deviens.
The way you think is how you become. I was about to say that's pretty much the only thing I've understood since the beginning. Finally, some English.
Mais ce qu'on dit ne parle pas forcément à la tête.
What we're saying
des fois,
not
c'est pas
necessarily
forcément,
talks
la
or
compréhension
speaks
ne va pas
to the
forcément
mind.
passer,
Comprehension might not
il y a pas mal
go
de gens
through
qui-
the mind. Lots of
qui me disent
people
qu'ils écoutent
tell
le
me
satsang,
that
ils comprennent pas trop, mais ça les touche quelque part.
they do
Et
listen to
ça,
the satsangs,
ils écoutent
but
plusieurs fois le même,
they can
ça-
feel that it's
ça-
touching
à un
them
moment donné,
somewhere, you know, it's moving them somewhere. But they
Parce que
don't
c'est
know
la
where
vérité.
exactly, but they don't really understand what is being said.
À ce qui est vrai, quoi.
But that's because that's
Et en
the
Inde aussi, on
truth
dit, il y a
talking.
une vérité et pas deux, évidemment.
Yeah. There's
Il peut y
only
avoir deux
in
vérités, sinon il y en a une des deux qui est fausse, quoi.
there's only one truth,
Et
which
une
is,
vérité,
you know,
ça ne
obvious. You know,
change pas.
if there was
C'est
two
stable,
truths,
c'est
then
éternel,
one would be wrong.
éternellement vrai.
So what's true is necessarily eternally true.
C'est ça.
C'est ça.
Ouais. Donc là, on fait pas un débat, tu vois.
We're not
Pas
debating here.
d'opposition, c'est-
There's no
c'est comme
opposition here. It is as it is.
Et est-ce que ces expériences
Are those experiences, those energetic experiences, isn't it some sort of preparation
des différents corps pour accueillir
for the different bodies to welcome
C'est
this?
ta question.
Well, there's two
Dans la
levels
zone
of
traditionnelle,
answering to this question.
on dit
On the
que oui, il y a une
traditional
préparation qui est nécessaire, mais ça,
path,
c'est,
it is
pour que
said
ça se
that
fasse
there's
confortablement, on va dire, tu vas
There
méditer,
might
tu vas
be a
purifier,
need
etc.
for a preparation and purifying
Mais
of
il
the
est
body,
aussi possible d'avoir
but it's also
d'avoir le
possible
basculement
to-
avant d'avoir
for the
fait
shift
tout ça.
to
Et
happen
après, le nettoyage
without-
se fait après. En
without
général, ça dépend.
purifying or anything.
En général, quand le nettoyage se fait après, j'en connais quelques-uns.
It can and the purifying happens after the shift, but it is quite that is something. That is quite something.
Énergétique, assez forte.
It can be, you know,
Émotionnel.
pain
Ouais,
or
émotionnel.
even
Ça doit se réemboîter.
energetic pain
Donc
in a way,
c'est-
or emotional
Alors,
pain.
il y a tout- il y a tous les
Everything has to,
conditionnements qui
you know,
sautent à la
all the
figure,
conditioning
enfin,
just
toutes les
jump to
expériences
your
militantes,
face,
tous les
you know.
traumatismes, les blessures,
All the traumas, everything
sous
just
forme d'expériences de la vie,
comes
évidemment,
up
de rencontres, d'expériences, de situations,
through, you
qui
know,
te mettent face à
experiences
tes
in life,
limites,
you
à tes
know,
limites, à tout ce qui
encounters,
t'éloigne de ce que tu es
everything
vraiment.
that puts you, you know,
Ça peut être
away
violent.
from what you are really. It can be quite violent, you know.
D'où une
It's
préparation préalable,
comes
on a
to
vu
you
sur
and
le
it
temps.
challenges you.
Ouais,
And it-
j'ai eu la chance de ne pas vivre
Ouais.
trop ça.
I was quite
Ouais.
lucky
J'ai
not to
juste
go
modifié
through
mon
that.
régime alimentaire,
I
parce que j'ai
just
senti que
modified
c'était nécessaire.
the way I was eating my
Ça,
diet
au niveau
because I felt
énergétique,
it was
mais,
necessary on
parce
an
que
energetic
curieusement,
level.
après, j'ai rencontré un
Curiously,
maître
afterwards, I actually
éveillé,
met
entre guillemets. Bon,
another
on est tous éveillés, mais qui
enlightened,
avait vécu des
quote
gros troubles
unquote,
alimentaires après
because
l'éveil, et
everyone is
je lui ai dit, bah,
enlightened.
écoute, moi, c'est passé au cru, et
and he was
ça-
going through
il a fait, et ça lui a aidé.
lots of
Mais,
trouble with his
donc
diet,
oui,
and
il
I
a-
told him, well,
il
I'm
peut y
actually
avoir encore,
eating raw food,
Cela dit,
and
dans le nettoyage
tried it and it
post-sommeil,
helped.
la lessive après l'extase, comme dirait ce
Ouais.
superbe
It's
livre
the-
de Jack Cornfield.
the laundry after ecstasy.
Pour moi, le plus
After
difficile,
ecstasy,
c'était
the
que
laundry,
je ne
you know,
comprenais pas ce qui se passait.
It helped me. This book
Finalement.
helped me.
Et non, j'avais pas de guide. Moi, j'ai un éveil sauvage, sans guide, sans maître, sans voilà. Donc,
I went
Et je
through
comprenais pas, pour moi, c'était un
savage
échec, c'était un
awakening. I
retour
had
en
no
arrière.
guide, no.
c'était la vie était cruelle. Elle m'avait fait goûter au
To me,
paradis,
it
puis elle me
felt
mettait en
quite
enfer
cruel,
après.
you know, life,
C'est
you know,
comme ça que je
made
vivais.
gave me a
Il y aurait eu
taste
quelqu'un
of
qui m'a
heaven,
expliqué,
and I
mais
was
c'est un
back into those all those
nettoyage,
pains.
on
But
peut pas,
had I
et
had
on
a
met quelques outils,
guide,
bah
who would
là,
have
je pense
given
que ce
me
serait beaucoup mieux
either
passé.
tools
Donc,
or
c'est
just
pas- j'aurais pas
advices,
fait peur aux personnes
it would have been very
Si
good.
on le passe, ça peut vraiment bien se passer. Et au contraire, ça va être des
I just want people to understand. I don't want to frighten them. Just be very grateful because every time something comes up, every time something liberates itself,
Tout à fait une autre façon de le vivre.
and it's entirely another way of living things.
D'où l'importance, quand même, enfin, même si c'est pas, il y a des exceptions, mais
There are
en Inde, on dit
exceptions,
que c'est quand même très important d'avoir un guide.
but in India, it is
Ça-
said that it is
ça aide,
important
ça
to have a
rassure.
guide. It is
Comme je dis dans
reassuring
une autre vidéo, ça
and-
aide surtout à ne
and it
pas chercher
helps
compliqué. Parce qu'on
not
veut toujours,
to
on
look
veut toujours un
for
truc en plus, même quand on se dit,
difficulties.
faut que je fasse un réveil,
we're still,
quand on va vraiment
even on
au
the
fond,
path to awakening, we're still looking for something
La plupart
more.
des chercheurs spirituels, ils cherchent pas vraiment l'éveil.
Most of
Ils veulent
the
être
spiritual
un
seekers
personnage, spirituel,
want
qui
to-
envoie,
Oui,
qui a la classe.
ouais, ouais.
Et en fait,
to be, you know, like
Et super
have
pouvoir, et mettre,
superpowers and you know, have swag
Ouais,
because they're
peut-être que
on
c'est
the
une
path.
récupération d'un aspect du personnage, mais qu'au fond, Au fond, c'est quand même toujours la conscience qui se cherche.
Well, in the end, it's always
Mais
consciousness
justement,
that
il y a
is
vraiment
looking
une
for
opération,
itself,
de
always,
l'ego
but
qui-
there can
voilà.
there can be
on peut,
a grasping from the ego, the spiritual
pas du temps
ego, of
perdu, mais
course.
on va dire qu'on peut prendre des chemins plus longs à force
It is,
de,
yeah, true. You can actually go through
d'émettre
paths
des
that are
petites
quite
trucs à
longer.
ajouter, en fait. Voilà.
You know, like add yourself some difficulties.
Oui, c'est ça.
J'en ai connu,
You know,
sans ce
there's
gros
there
sens.
is
On peut
an
rester sacrément accroché à ça.
Ah ouais, et toi, t'en es où? Ah ouais, moi j'ai vécu ça, ça,
Et
ça.
oui.
Et je vais aller
there's such a joy in having so many experiences like that.
Celui qui aurait les plus
In the Buddhist center, it almost felt like a competition, you know, like, oh, I had this experience or this experience. And I was like, well, I don't see anything.
J'avais les boules et puis un jour
I was so angry.
Ouais.
Bien sûr que non.
And someone said to me, there's no need for that.
Effectivement détourné parce que exercer
Yeah,
une
you can-
fascination
yeah,
et
it
on
can-
s'enferme dedans et-
It's fascinating, but it can also trap you.
Après,
Il y a plein de gens, ils viennent, c'est pour la foire du trône, tu leur dis, bah, c'est là-bas.
mais en même temps, ces choses-là peuvent aussi amener un éveil. Mais
But at the same time,
ça
it
peut
can
être
also
moyen
a
détourné qu'utilise
backdoor
la vie
way
pour amener
for
ces
life
personnes
to
qui
bring
sont d'une
people
quête de
with
pouvoir
this
à ce moment,
power
un éveil où là,
hunger
ils vont s'apercevoir
to
que
get, enlightened and realize that, and that there's no need for it. That can also be what happens.
Ah, alors, on en
Does
parlait un peu hier.
awakening resolve pathological
Écoute, dans
illness,
mon expérience,
mental illness? In my experience,
ça peut en résoudre un
it
certain
can-
nombre. Alors, pathologie, qu'est-ce que tu mets dessus? Donc,
It can
si
help.
c'est des
What do you-
des
what do you-
traumatismes ou des névroses, des choses comme
What is
ça.
it you call a pathology? If those
Non,
are
c'est
trauma,
C'est-à-dire, c'est pas d'éveil. Alors, c'est pas la prise de conscience de l'éveil, cet instant, cette bascule. Je vais dire. non.
This
Par contre, le
shift,
processus,
I would say that no, it's not
parce que le
helping,
processus, comme je disais tout
but
à
the
l'heure, il met en
whole
lumière
process
tout ce qui est
is
souffrance,
actually putting lights,
Donc,
enlightening
Quand on est accompagné dans cette mise en lumière, on a
all the
l'occasion de
beliefs and
libérer.
traumas. And
Donc là,
if
oui, mais
we,
en tant que processus. Pour moi, après
as a
quelques cas,
process,
apparemment,
it can
qui sont
help,
comme
you know,
Berthollet ou
like,
Byron Katie, on en parlait ce matin, qui après avoir vu
so
des
except people like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie,
étaient guéris d'une dépression, sont sortis directement de la dépression.
you know, that
Il y en a
after
sûrement
this
des cas, et
enlightenment
moi, j'ai
just,
aussi des
you
cas
know,
où ça suffit
were
pas, et où après,
no
c'est
longer
une démarche
depressed.
progressive.
But most of the time it's not enough. It is a process.
Ah, mais ça aide énormément.
It does help.
progressive.
Yes, of
Parce
course
que,
it
en
does,
fait, à
because
partir du moment où,
you're seeing things
tu te
clearly.
reconnais comme étant cette pure présence
When you
d'accueil,
recognize yourself
alors
as
il y a
this
la
pure
capacité d'aller
presence
d'aller
of
aborder toutes les zones les
welcoming,
plus sombres et les
then
plus
there's no
difficiles.
problem to
que tu pouvais
welcome
absolument
the
pas
the
aborder avant, en fait,
darkest
c'était pas
parts
possible,
that you
tu
couldn't
vois.
welcome before.
Donc, c'est ce
It
qu'on
wasn't
appelle les
possible.
thérapies de la conscience. Non.
Je veux dire, c'est un processus.
Non.
There's nothing magical with
Là,
it.
je parle d'un
It's a
processus de,
well, it's a process
d'accompagnement, de guérison.
of healing.
Post-bascule, on est bien d'accord.
Mais ça dépend parce
It
que,
can
comment dire, je pense qu'il y a des choses
either
qui peuvent
happen
se
before
faire
or
comme ça,
after
sans
the
être au
shift.
courant. Et après, c'est bien aussi d'être accompagné parce que ça
It is good to
permet
be
de pas se perdre,
accompanied
parce que le mental, il peut aussi
because
nous perdre.
the mind can lose itself.
On peut aussi, une
in
bonne
all those
partie,
stories.
le vivre, le régler seul, le libérer seul.
We can, you know,
Parce qu'on est au
liberate it,
courant.
a
Et
lot
parce
of
qu'on voit,
it
tiens, cette
on
situation,
our
on est en train de me
own.
mettre face à moi-même. Alors,
Because
j'arrête
we
de
are
m'en prendre à la
fully
personne, la
aware that-
situation, le conflit, le machin, et tout projeter à l'extérieur.
And I
Et je
stop
vais venir
projecting
regarder, tiens, mais de quoi
outside
ça me parle
and I just
À
come
quoi
back
ça me
to
renvoie
what is
Et
it,
là, je
you
vais
know,
pouvoir,
throwing
si j'ai
me
quelques
back
outils,
to.
le libérer moi-même.
And if
Et
I
ça,
have
faut
the tools, I
quand
can
même
liberate.
demander à quelqu'un de nous aider.
We can liberate it by on our own. But sometimes we need help and we ask for it.
Une pathologie, c'est un point de vue qu'on a sur une situation.
Oui, c'est vrai aussi.
Donc déjà,
Oui.
rien que ça,
Oui.
My take on a pathology is actually a way of seeing things, you know, and yes, I agree with that. So
C'est ce qu'on met sur le mot pathologie. Oui.
it's like, you know, homosexuality would be a pathology, but it's just, but that's just
Mais tu peux. Ok,
concept.
j'aime bien- enfin,
same with depression. It's just a context that,
il fut un temps, si j'avais entendu ça, je me serais
well,
mise en
once
colère.
upon a time, when if I had heard that, I would have
Faut l'avoir
got
vécu.
very angry.
C'est que par exemple, une dépression qui dure des mois.
You have to have lived through a depression that goes on for years.
Et après, de comprendre
And to-
après, une fois que tu as fait le chemin et que tu as tout nettoyé et tout ça,
When
et
you've
que tu comprends
cleaned everything
que,
and you
je
understand
n'étais pas la dépression, mais
you understand that I wasn't the depression, that there was depression, something like that, the scientific identification. But beyond that, depression is a concept. It's just every therapy brings tools and a way to handle things, and it's really a way of seeing things. But
et qu'on le pose sur un individu. Mais là, c'est vraiment on sort de tout ça, de ce cadre de ce qu'on est en train de discuter. Mais...
En fait, ce qui change vraiment
what changes really
au fur et à mesure du chemin spirituel et avec l'éveil, c'est
with the path and awakening,
la conscience voit.
consciousness sees. That's it.
C'est presque, on pourrait même dire, la conscience est pure vision, quoi. Donc,
We could even say that consciousness here is pure vision.
Il n'y a pas de magie. Quand on est sur un chemin spirituel, on pense souvent qu'il y a un éveil qui va nous tomber dessus, boum, ça va être
When we
magique,
are
etc.
on the path, we think that is some sort of magical enlightenment that will, drop on us. But there's no such thing as magic in that. It's everything has to be seen. That's it. Everything.
La paix, c'est vraiment
Peace is really
quand tu ne résistes pas à
when
ce qui
you.
émerge,
It's really when you're not
parce que tu comprends
resisting to
les
anything because you
Quand
understand
je
all the
travaillais
mechanisms.
à
When I
Paris,
was
je travaillais dans un gros cinéma, on fait
working
18 000
at a
entrées par
movie
jour.
theater with
Des
like
fois,
something like
j'avais-
20,000,
des Parisiens.
tickets. Most of the time, those were Parisians,
Et
and
des fois, il y
it
avait
has
des-
its
des
importance.
litiges clients. Donc, il y avait des
And
litiges
sometimes there
clients,
were,
c'est pas
problems
en
with
douceur, hein, c'est des fois,
some clients.
t'as un truc qui marche pas, genre il pleut dans une salle parce qu'il y a un trou au plafond, et là
And,
t'as tout le monde qui t'engueule en même temps, donc t'as 4 personnes
So you
qui
have,
qui
like,
t'insultent en même temps.
4 people
Et-
yelling at you at the
et
same
là,
time,
je
and
restais centré, je restais calme toujours, je répondais aux
and
gens,
I
et
kept
mes
on
collègues me disaient,
staying
mais comment tu
quite
fais
centered, quite calm,
ou
and
même d'autres gens qui
my
arrivaient
colleagues
se
would,
m'insulter sans raison aussi.
would
Ça-
ask me,
ça-
how do you do
très
that?
courant, très, très courant. Et en fait, je leur disais, parce que
And
je
I
les
told my
comprends.
colleagues,
En plus,
because
à
I
l'époque,
understand
je
them.
travaillais beaucoup l'intuition, j'avais vraiment
I was working a lot on the intuition, so every time I was seeing someone, I could see his life, and I understood. And this is why you can actually untie the knots.
Ce que je disais hier, c'est tu tombes dans l'illusion quand tu n'as pas compris la mécanique, mais
You
quand tu la
fall
vois,
into
c'est plus
the
pareil.
the trap of the
Tu
illusion
es,
is because you
par
haven't seen the
exemple,
mechanism
le
of it.
désir, ou comme on parlait, comment on dit,
Desire or
quand on est dépendant, là,
addiction or addiction.
L'addiction fonctionne que quand tu n'as pas
It
compris la
functions,
mécanique.
it works when
Mais
you
quand t'as
haven't
compris comment ça
seen
marche le
the
désir,
mechanism.
quand
When
t'as
you
compris qu'un
see
désir,
how
ça te
desire
donne
works,
parce qu'il y a une insatisfaction sous-jacente.
desire can only
Regarde bien
rise
dans l'expérience.
only
À chaque
when
fois
there's
qu'un
a
désir
sense
naît, c'est parce
of
qu'il y a une insatisfaction avant.
unsatisfaction before.
Si t'arrives à
every
être là
time.
avant l'insatisfaction,
If you can be there,
le désir est-
present before the unsatisfaction,
donc ça résolue
desire
l'insatisfaction,
won't
le désir ne peut plus
rise
naître.
up.
Donc faut
Because
remonter
if you resolve the
comme
unsatisfaction,
ça,
then the desire,
on
there's no need for it.
déboulonne. On s'est démonté complètement, tu vois. On s'est
So you break
tout
down
est-
everything.
tout est là à plat, quoi. Et-
Everything is put, on a table when you just look at things. All the conditioned parts with unsatisfactions or traumas or hurt or they will reveal themselves, and this is where we can actually see them and see, welcoming, and recognize that it's here. This is how you take care of it.
Ouais.
And under this light of understanding, this is going to resolve itself.
Non seulement le pouvoir de voir, mais le
The
pouvoir
power
d'aimer.
of
Et le
seeing
pouvoir
and the
d'aimer est
power
tellement
of
fort
loving
qu'il est capable
is
d'aimer
so
absolument
strong that it can love absolutely everything. It might sound, crazy, but I saw a TV show once, serial killer, American serial killer, during his trial, and his victims and all people were, kept telling him, we're gonna kill you when you get out of jail, and a woman was there. Both her daughter were killed by this guy, and during this trial, she probably was on the spiritual path, and I've liberated myself from this pain, and I do pardon you. And he had been quite still ever since the beginning of the trial, but he actually wept. He tried crying because he was moved. love is not something sentimental. It's being with no resistance, and to see the absolute innocence of every beings, because it's ignorance that drives him.
Et c'est aussi une image qui moi m'a choquée à l'époque, c'était il y a un an je crois, le Dalai Lama qui assiste à la.
I was shocked by the Dalai Lama, who was, he was spending his birthday with the birthday of Bush, George W. Bush. He was like, yeah, well, he's my friend, so yes, I'm going to be there for his birthday. And my partner said, well, you don't know. To me, because to me it was not possible. George W. Bush is like someone who go to war, and Dalai Lama is. But when you recognize I am, isn't it the same I am? And you can see all people that are not aware of that. And it is quite courageous of him, because it is quite a lesson. Yeah, it was made on purpose. He actually put a picture of him blowing, Bush blowing the candles on his website. It was wow. The real power of transformation lies in understanding and seeing, first with ourselves, with our own traumas, and then with the rest of the world. He's been asked, Dalai Lama, about Bush. And he said, he's my buddy, really. We just really do not share the same vision of politics. So he really showed that you can have different point of views in politics and still be friends. He's actually shown the difference between the manifest and the unmanifested. So from the absolute standpoint, we are this I am, and those acts are not what you are. They are carrying a meaning of your understanding of the world at some point in time, yes. But so when, for instance, in the movie theater, in front of a client, I'm just right here, right now. This person is going through that now, but it's not what it is. He or she is. It's still pure love that is expressing itself. When we've seen all the mechanisms that we have, to make the other suffer, for instance, in couples, partnership, there's a lot of techniques, that are used to triggers to see if the other one is still attached. And when you've seen how you do it yourself, you see how it goes with the others. It's like the kid that is throwing a tantrum, to try and get what he wants. After awakening, you see the ego trying a little to, with this little thought like, I am awakened, but it was seen and dropped immediately. I could see parts of me that were grabbing this idea of I am awakened, and that it was trying to push other parts of me to heal parts. But in truth, there's not really an other. It's just a mirror to me. Everything
se vivre à l'extérieur, en fait,
that appears to be
est
lived
en train de me
outside
raconter ce qui se vit à l'intérieur.
is actually telling me what
À
is
partir de
being
là, dans
lived
toute
inside.
situation,
And from
je ne vais
that
plus
point
du tout essayer de solutionner la situation,
of
de faire
understanding,
changer l'autre ou de
you're
quoi que ce
not
soit.
trying
Je vais
to
aller regarder, tiens, de
change
quoi ça
the
me parle?
situation or the
Ah,
other,
mais
but you're
c'est
just going to
les
go
mots
and
qui sont en
see,
train de se
okay,
parler
so what
elles-mêmes,
it
en
is
fait, dans ces
telling
histoires.
me about
Et
myself.
c'est à ce niveau-là que je vais avoir une action
And this
d'accueil,
is
d'accompagnement,
where I
d'écoute.
will be
Et
having
comme
some
par
sort of
magie, alors,
work
boum,
or practice
la
is to
situation extérieure se
welcome
modifie, obligatoirement.
this part of me.
Ou la
And
relation,
all of a sudden, the
déjà,
situation
on décharge
outside
les autres
changes.
de porter le poids
We're also
de notre
relieving
inconfort.
people
Voilà.
from having
Aussi.
to, you know, help us with a trauma or carrying, you know, the weight of our happiness, or they don't need to make us happy anymore.
C'est énorme. Et ça, dans un couple, si
In
les
a
deux
couple,
protagonistes font ça, il ne peut
if
plus vraiment y avoir de conflit.
both
Ça désamorce tout.
people in a couple do that, you can't really find any more fighting anymore.
Une des conséquences de la vision, de la réalisation que le moi est
One of the
illusoire,
consequences
le personnage moi,
of seeing that this
c'est
I
qu'il
is
n'y a plus de
illusory
notion de faute,
is that there's no notion of
et non plus de
guilt or fault
Voilà, ça
or
s'opère.
worthiness.
Donc,
It actually
je n'approprie
drops
plus, en fait,
with enlightenment.
les
There's
choses qui
no
s'expriment à
clinging
travers cet organisme.
onto whatever is expressing itself
Je n'ai
through
plus
this
d'erreur, enfin, je
organism.
n'ai plus la notion d'être en
There's no
retard.
more mistakes. I'm
Et
not
j'ai
guilty
plus non
anymore.
plus d'orgueil ou de quoi que ce
There's-
soit, d'avoir fait
there's no
bien
more
certaines choses.
pride
En
in
revanche,
doing
il peut y avoir de
things
la
good
gratitude
or
d'avoir
bad,
été l'outil
but
voilà,
I can
que
sometimes
cet
feel
organisme soit un bel
gratitude
outil
towards,
d'expression
you know,
de telle ou telle chose.
having
Ça,
this
c'est
body
vraiment
being the
très
expression
très
of
bon à ressentir.
something
Mais
nice,
il n'y a pas de
but it's
fierté,
just
une chose comme ça.
no
Et ça encore,
pride.
bon, ce qui est le plus important, c'est qu'il n'y a plus de culpabilité.
But most
Parce que ça,
important
c'est vraiment
is
une
there's no
grande,
more
grande source de
guilt,
souffrance.
because it is a very, very deep base of suffering.
Absolument.
So you can
Exactement.
still
Il peut y avoir
stumble,
des parts
but
de
no
nous
more
qui
guilt
sont habituées à
in
culpabiliser, qui
stumbling.
s'expriment,
Yes,
et qui
indeed.
sont vues et qui sont tout de suite désamorcées parce que il est reconnu que non, il y a personne qui fait, qu'il y a personne qui est au centre de l'action, en fait.
There
Et
is
que des
a
mécanismes
recognition
qui
that
se-
there's
qui
no
se-
one at the center that
qui
is doing
s'agencent
anything wrong.
Suivant les situations, suivant
It's
les
just
conditionnements,
conditionings
et qu'on a
and
choisi, qu'on n'a pas voulu. Jamais.
beliefs
Donc,
that are
il n'y a
organizing
pas de moindre
themselves
coupable en quoi que ce
and
soit,
you know,
ni en soi ni dans le monde. C'est énorme.
Quand on le voit pour soi, on
and
le voit aussi.
it works for us and for the world and for the others.
Et
Yes,
on voit l'innocence pure de chaque
and we
être, en
see
fait.
the pure innocence in every being.
Il y a une dissociation complète entre
There's a dissociation
les
between
actes
acts
manifestés dans le monde
manifested into the world and
ce qui est, donc le non
what
manifesté, qui
is
est
this
toujours le
unmanifested
même.
that is always the
J'ai
same.
eu cette pensée, moi, après l'éveil, je me suis
I had
dit,
this thought after
dans
the
un
shift.
cas, je pourrais prendre un pistolet et tuer
I
des
could-
gens et
I could
j'en
grab a
porterais
gun,
aucune, enfin,
could grab a
s'il y
gun
avait
and kill
besoin, quoi.
people if there was a need
J'en
for it.
ferais gratuitement comme ça, mais
I wouldn't do
même
it for
gratuitement, ça me
free.
ferait rien.
I
Ça
don't
ne
think
changerait pas
it
ce que
wouldn't.
je suis.
Even
C'est
if I
une pensée un
did,
peu
actually,
folle, hein.
it wouldn't
Ça m'est
change
venu,
anything. I know it's a
comme ça.
crazy thought, but I could
Et,
see that
et
doesn't
pendant
change what
aussi
I
des
am.
années, je le dis souvent en satsang,
For years,
pendant des années,
I
j'étais très tenté par la voie monastique.
I was really tempted by,
tenté par
you know,
ça, et peut-être le plus gros choc après
becoming
l'éveil
a-
pour moi,
a-
ça a été de
to
me
go
rendre
live in
compte
a
qu'en fait, la
monastery.
sexualité était un
And the
acte.
biggest shock to me
Comme
was
on
to
dit,
realize
il y a
that
pas
sexuality
de-
was
enfin,
an
c'est-
act
C'est pas plus ou moins spirituel. Parce que moi,
that
sans m'en
is
rendre
not
compte, je pense que j'avais
more
un
or
truc
less
avec ça.
spiritual
Je sais pas de quand
than
ça
anything
datait, mais en
else.
tout cas,
I don't
j'avais
know
un
where it
truc,
comes from, but
c'était
it
nettement
was
spirituel, tu vois.
spiritual.
Quel
To me,
soit ce que je
sexuality
fais.
was something that was
C'est
less
la danse de la vie,
spiritual
quoi, tu
than.
vois.
And I realized that whatever I do, it is
C'est-
just the dance
c'est
of
beau, quoi,
life,
tu
and
vois.
everything is
La
beautiful.
vaisselle, c'est aussi beau que...
Doing
Tu vois, c'est
the dishes is as
vraiment
beautiful
du
as.
du point de vue, entre guillemets, de la conscience,
From this absolute
il y a une
standpoint,
plénitude
there's
dans
a
l'acte,
wholeness,
peu importe,
a bliss
peu importe l'acte,
in the act,
quoi.
whatever the act, it's
faire la
beautiful.
vaisselle, échanger
Il y a
comme
Dishes.
on fait
une
là.
échelle de valeur.
Sharing
il y a
right
pas-
now, there's no
Il y a
more
pas, cet acte-là, ça vaut
hierarchy
plus que
anymore.
ça, et je me définis, parce qu'en fait c'est ça.
And I'm not.
L'ego se définit par rapport à ses actes.
There's no more the
Le
need
personnage
to
se définit par rapport
define
au
myself
personnage. Comment
depending
je marche,
on
comment
how
je
I,
bouge, comment
you know,
j'agis,
how I
comment
act,
j'interagis.
how I work,
Il y a
how
plus
I
ça, en fait.
walk, how
C'est-
I interact. There's no more this need to
Euh,
you know.
Qu'est-ce que je voulais dire par rapport à ça?
define yourself.
Ouais, c'est ça.
Est-ce que ça veut dire que cette approche amène à banaliser
Does that mean that this
drames comme
practice
Shoah, comme
can actually make events like Shoah or things like that something mundane?
Par rapport à ça. C'est,
People often ask me
une fois,
about
j'ai
that.
une personne elle me pose
Once
la question,
Someone
je
asked,
suis agricultrice et
I'm a farmer and
je suis sur un chemin spirituel,
I'm on a
mais je
spiritual
prends
path,
une
and
vache
yet
à l'abattoir,
I get,
comment faire
my cows to get slaughtered.
Des
How do
questions
I
comme
do
ça,
that? How do I
parce que du
handle
point de
that?
vue humain,
Because
il
from the
semblerait qu'il y ait
human
mort
point of view, it feels like there's a
Et
death
souffrance.
et souffrance.
and
Ouais.
suffering.
Et souffrance. Il y a plusieurs étages en fait à cette
There's
réponse.
different levels.
Et, en fait, idéalement, pour bien répondre à
answers.
la question, il faudrait répondre au moins à 3 ou 4 niveaux de...
Ideally, it would be good to answer from 3 to 4 different levels to answer every question properly.
Du point de vue de la conscience absolue, c'est-à-dire
From the
du point de vue
standpoint, absolute standpoint,
de être,
consciousness
de la vie,
standpoint,
il y a
from
aucun jugement
beingness,
vis-à-vis de quoi que ce soit.
there's no judgments
Il y a
towards
juste un
anything.
mouvement qui se déroule.
It's just a dance,
Et-
life, dancing that is
Et,
happening.
ouais, il n'y a pas de culpabilité.
There's no
Il y a juste,
guilt.
ce qui est comme c'est.
There's just what is as it is.
C'est tout.
Ce qui n'empêche pas la
That's it. That's all.
Et,
Which
envers
doesn't
la
prevent,
souffrance.
compassion or
ouais, alors
towards,
ça,
c'est suffering
c'est
that
après,
arise.
Si tu...
That arises. Yes.
Ça, en fait, c'est justement c'est le problème de l'ego.
That is
C'est-à-dire
the
que
problem with the ego.
La conscience absolue s'est tellement cristallisée dans l'idée
Consciousness crystallized
limité,
itself in such
qu'à
a way
partir de là,
in this,
elle a créé,
limited
des
me.
territoires
So it created
liés à ce
territories
mot limité. Et à partir du moment où il y a territoire, il y a
linked to
conflit.
this idea. So every time there's a territory,
Donc,
and
les
territories,
c'est
there
pas
are
que
conflicts.
physique, hein, c'est les territoires d'idées, surtout d'idées même.
And when I say territories,
Ça,
I'm
c'est mon
talking about,
idée, elle va de
ideas.
là à là,
You know,
et toi,
like,
tu rentres pas dans-
Ideas can be territories.
Et en fait, du coup, ça crée des oppositions.
It
Et
creates
puis, bon,
oppositions.
là, en fait, au niveau du cœur, évidemment, il y a de la compassion et tu te dis,
From the heart, of course, there's
bon, ils
compassion.
agissent, comme ça, mais tu sais pourquoi. C'est-à-dire que tu as compris que c'est la mécanique
So
du
you can
ego,
see that, oh, all right,
qui est
they're
le
acting that
territoire
way,
qui se
but
forme,
you know
les
where it's coming
idées,
from.
moi, je
You
pense
know
comme ça.
what kind
Et
of
quelle que soit l'idée,
ideas territory,
Forcément.
this idea territory
il va y avoir
it
confrontation.
comes from, and you
Quelle que
know
soit
that
ta
it's
croyance, même si c'est la plus
it's gonna
sublime
bring
qu'elle soit, elle est
you
limitée.
to a
Et il y aura confrontation.
conflict,
Obligatoire.
because every time you see yourself as limited, there's going to be conflicts.
Même si je crois,
Even if
sans
I
l'avoir
believe
réalisé,
without
tout est un.
realizing that
Si je l'ai pas
all
réalisé,
is one,
toi, tu vas
even
dire,
if
bah non, il y a
you
deux. Et puis tu vas avancer des
if I
arguments,
don't, if I
ça va
haven't
pas nous
realized it,
tu vois.
and you tell me no,
Et à
there's
partir
two,
du moment où c'est une
then
croyance,
we're
ou c'est
gonna
une
fight.
idée, forcément, il va y avoir,
If it's a belief, if it's an idea,
La
there's
conception
you're gonna
d'ignorance.
you're gonna see conflict arise.
Donc effectivement, oui, on peut voir la Shoah ou
So you can see
la
Shoah
torture
or torture
les massacres, etc.
or
comme
massacres
simplement l'expression d'ignorance,
as an expression of
sans porter de
ignorance,
jugement sur le
without
fait que c'est bien ou pas bien. C'est
adding any judgment.
et après la compassion pour
It
tous
is,
les êtres qui souffrent dans ces situations.
full stop.
est là.
But have at the same time compassion for people going through that.
Et en fait,
There's
la
no
question,
indifference.
on peut revenir là-dessus par rapport à la culpabilité, c'est est-ce que ça veut dire parce qu'il y a
I
plus
just want to
de
come
culpabilité,
back to
alors je
your
peux faire
question about
n'importe quoi, je m'en fous. Est-ce que
guilt.
c'est ça la question En fait,
Is your
ce qui se passe,
question
c'est que c'est pas,
if there's
il y a
no
plus de
guilt, then I can do
culpabilité
anything I
parce que,
want and I can
je me
do,
dédouane de tout ça. C'est quelqu'un qui il n'y a plus l'idée de quelqu'un qui est auteur.
It's not about the
D'accord.
guilt of,
C'est vraiment
doing
une
good or
autre
bad.
vision.
It's the idea that there's
Et
no
ça
one
entraîne aussi
doing
une grande
anything.
responsabilité,
But it also brings,
paradoxically,
paradoxically,
dans le sens de prendre la responsabilité
a
de ce
great
qui est ressenti,
responsibility
de ce qui est vécu, là.
of what is being lived
D'accord.
right here, right now.
Quand une situation se présente,
So when a situation comes up,
le problème n'est jamais la situation. un
the
peu comme
problem
ce
is
qui
never
était
the
hier.
situation.
Le problème, s'il y en a un, ou
The
la
problem,
souffrance,
if there's
ne va
one,
venir
or
que
the
de la
suffering,
façon dont j'ai réagi.
comes from the way I'm
Une personne
reacting to
réagit
it.
d'une autre manière. Cette façon
And
de réagir
another
a
person
une
would
autre
react
propre,
differently.
propre
So
conditionnement,
this
hein,
reaction
par exemple.
is proper to
Et
my
ça,
own
j'en suis
conditionings.
totalement responsable,
And
au sens
I
où
am
personne
fully
ne peut rien.
responsible
Je peux pas
for
accuser
that.
quelqu'un
I
de ça,
can't,
en fait. Donc je ne vais pas rentrer en guerre
accuse
envers,
someone of being
une
responsible of
personne
how I
qui va
react.
parler de telle ou telle manière. Mes parents parce qu'ils m'ont éduqué comme ça n'a plus de sens.
At some point, you can't,
C'est une sorte de
say that it's
conditionnement.
because of your
J'en prends la
parents or
responsabilité.
someone else has
Donc,
talked to
je ne
you
vais pas aller
in a
faire la
bad
guerre à
way.
qui que ce soit.
So
Voilà.
at some
Donc,
point,
je
there's
vais pas
a
faire n'importe quoi,
responsibility that that is taken, and there's
il
no
peut
more
avoir
need
cette,
to go for
réaction
conflict
de conflit et de lutte envers quoi que ce soit, en fait, envers aucune situation.
towards anything
prends la
really. Any kind of
responsabilité de
conflict
mon
just drops because if the responsibility is fully taken.
Quand Padovani, elle parle de... Alors Isabelle Padovani, je vous donnerai les références.
Isa Padovani talks
Elle
about
parle de garder un cœur ouvert et
having an
cœur.
open heart and keep an open heart. About this, she talks about crucifixion, the Christ being crucified, and to be open to that and be right at the center of the heart. Once I saw someone beating his dog, and I could see the eyes of the dog. You can't not be touched. I was heartbroken. But if you get into it, you can see the ignorance of the master and yet being very compassionate with the dog. This idea of the Christ being crucified, and if I could actually transcend that, this rawness. Often we think that because there's no me anymore, some acts like that, we won't do anything anymore, we're not active anymore, or we just let things happen. But that's not it. It's replaced actually by this current of life, Kayala in Sanskrit. It's an automatic happening. Life will do something. Something happens in front of you. Like you're on a crossroad and a kid is crossing the road and there's a bus coming up and you just stop. It's automatic. You're just going to put your hand on the kid. And it's just going to happen on its own. And it's only love. It's going to do well because it's going to come from the heart. Usually the heart does better than the head. Some of them go through awakening and then they're just, out of the world. They're not interested about the world anymore. And for others, it happens differently. Compassion rises. And so there's this intermediary vision, like everything is perfect, and yet there's also a lot of suffering. And I saw very bad news recently, and I was like, but this is not possible to see so many suffering. But I was also very aware that the only solution is realizing the self, is the only solution. This is why I'm sharing. But it's just to notice that everything is possible in this life. Suffering and solutions to suffering are there. There's no more this division, this sense of division, this judgment. There's no more judgment. And in response to that, there's wisdom that arises, which doesn't come from the mind. The idea of persecutor and victim drops. But there's still the vision of people suffering because they're not aware of what they truly are.